All right. Well, we are back again for another episode of Future of Church, and talking about the intersection of tech, faith, and culture. We're going to be talking about the kind of the pace of AI and what it means, and how does that fit into Sabbath, and all sorts of different things related to this. So I'm Christopher.
And I'm Joe.
Hey, there you go. We are on it. And if I'm not mistaken, it's next week that you can't make it, right?
Yes.
Next week. Okay. So there'll be a little bit of a gap between this one and our next one. But what started this conversation, so we always catch up backstage, and we actually were talking about Sabbath, and we were talking about some of this stuff, and it actually tied in because last week I had talked about this on my other podcast about the CEO of Zoom. I'd come across an article where one of the things he is most excited about with the advance of artificial intelligence is these AI agents who can serve as almost little minions for him that he can send off to meetings on his behalf and attend and all this other stuff so that he can attend multiple meetings at the same time. He can be in multiple places at once and then just catch up on the notes afterwards. And as I read this, I just continue to think about the fact that the pace and the march of technology is just relentless. And I was reading a study just last week on kind of the order of magnitudes of where it's going. And if you feel overwhelmed and like it's moving fast now, just give it a couple more years. It's only going to move faster. And to me, this just really hit me because I'm like, we have to battle back against this as believers, because this is just it's not the way we were made. We were not made to just keep doing more and faster and better and go and never take a break. And so we happen to be talking backstage about Sabbath and what it really means and why it matters. And it seemed like a perfectly relevant, applicable topic as we live in a world that seems to just be telling us, hey, that whole like rest thing, forget it. You don't need it anymore because now AI is going to make it so you don't need to rest. You could just keep going at 100% speed all the time. So yeah, I don't know, Joe, what was your initial reaction to the article?
A lot of anxiety. Just because just the idea of being in multiple places at once, even virtually, just makes it's too busy to me. I operate at a certain level of urgency, which is not a high level of urgency, as you know, but it's like, even the idea of like, okay, they'll get notes, they'll bring them back. I'll look at notes and be like, yep, notes. And I've used AI tools to summarize meetings and get like minutes and bullets and whatever, and they've done a pretty good job so far. I would be fearful, and I know this isn't quite on the top, I'd be fearful that something was missed or mistranslated, and I'd have to do extra footwork just to clarify stuff on the back end to make sure I understood it well. But there's, the concept of Sabbath, it's easy to think, okay, Sabbath really is only something we have to think about, once
on
a week.
Sunday, right? It's a day Sunday.
Yeah, it's a Sunday, Saturday, whatever your tradition is. We were talking backstage, like, could be a Wednesday.
Yeah, right. Whatever
day off, and you want to treat it that way. But one of the things when you said, the way you phrased it, you said that we won't have to rest because we have all these bots doing all these things for us. We won't need that rest and recharge. Like, if we're doing all of this, stuff to make things easier, so we're doing more, but we're not actually working harder. One of my reflections that I had last year that I had shared with people was like, it's just, without the work, the Sabbath is a hard thing to value. Like, if we're able to just dump all of our work into bots so that, yeah, we did a lot of work, we got a lot accomplished, but we didn't really do any work. It's really easy to slip into a Sabbath day going, I don't know.
I got nothing else to do. So,
Yeah, let me, one of the things my wife and I yesterday at the end of the day were like, man, we were on our phones a lot, and for a Sabbath, it's like where Sabbath is meant to be, in many ways, yes, it's rest. It is for us in that respect. It's also an opportunity, just reflecting on who God is, his goodness in our lives. For many people, there's some aspect of trust that I can take a day. I can
yeah.
take a day and not work out. I can take a day and not do any reading for work. I can take a day and, whatever, because it doesn't feel like we can. And
Well, and I think that's really
yeah,
the concern I have as I watch, as we become more connected to more things, and even going, oh, the bots are going to do the work for us. But even like you said, and I use a fair amount of automations in a lot of the work that I do. It actually doesn't reduce the work. It changes it,
mm-hmm.
but it's still like, if I can't attend a meeting, I get an AI summary of it, but I use that summary that I then use to talk to somebody who was there to
Right.
go, hey, like this was just, give me the context, like what decisions need. So it really doesn't reduce the mental, emotional fatigue of a lot of the stuff that's happening and the pace at which things are moving. I'm actually just really concerned, because reading through the Bible, Sabbath is way more than just like, oh yeah, 6 days, crush it. And then like after 6 days rest. It's like, no, it's built into a lot of things of like, hey, cool it. Like, get away from whatever it is that you're used to doing and go do this festival for 7 days and just enjoy being in community and don't think about your work. And it's like, what? Or the Sabbath year where it's like, don't even work the fields, just eat whatever they grow. Like, if you said that to anybody today in modern corporate America and said every 7 years, you just don't work and you live off of whatever you have.
Yeah.
And people would just be like,
well, right. Well, because so much, and because so much what we do involves consuming, we got to consume. And there are people who can afford to consume at a certain rate and others who can't. And so even thinking about, deploying all these AI assistants, I'm sure there's a cutoff to where, there's, I don't know how accessible it would be, but to be able to be, quote, that productive over a period of time is probably more accessible to a certain group of people than it is to another group of people. And so I think we've talked about just how, like, that just one of the things that I think the church needs to be prepared for ministering towards is just that lengthening divide between people who have and people who do not, because it's only going to get worse. And I think we had also discussed at one point, or maybe it was just a conversation we had about like the need for rare earth materials to create these processors, to create these, like, it's not like the word rare is attached to it for a reason.
Right.
And at what point is it where, you have the people with all the things and you have the people without all the things. And then what do you do, in between?
It's funny you bring up the rare earth materials piece as well. Also in the sense that really when you think about Sabbath rest, like we often think about it through kind of a modern context, but in the text, like it even applies to the earth. Like the example I even gave of like every 7 years, you let the earth rest.
Yeah.
Like there's a need to let rest occur. And it's not just like our physiological, well, human beings are tired, they need sleep, they need to, it's like, there's something much bigger about this concept of, hey, don't just keep scraping every last bit of efficiency out of everything. It's not the way God wired and designed things.
Yeah. And the reason I'm glad you said something, and broke in because I realized I forgot what my concluding thought was supposed to be there. But, this idea is you have, as you're describing the CEO, this class of people who essentially can continue to consume, but feel like they need to continue to make this and that happen. And so Sabbath is lost on them because Sabbath is always on the horizon in terms of maybe if I have this much, I'll have enough. I saw an article that said that most millionaires don't think of themselves as wealthy because they haven't hit like a $5 million mark. Like once I have 5 million, then I don't have to worry about money, period. So I'm not wealthy yet. And that's just absurd to my experience. But then at the other end of it, you have the people who don't have those means, don't have access to those things, for whom Sabbath becomes almost a pipe dream because like when is it just to survive? I'm not
Just
even
to survive.
trying to consume. I'm just trying to make it by, but I don't have all the widgets that these people have that allow them to do so. I'm stuck, and we already hear that narrative a lot. There's a lot more. Whenever I've really read some articles about it, there's a lot more mobility in and out of like government assistance and things like that. But that's usually from the end of people who fall into it and then get back out of it because, okay, I lost my job. I found a job. I have the means to do that. But you have this large segment of the population who are just stuck. And if we're not preparing to minister to those two extremes, as well as the middle, I think, we're going to find ourselves even more hurting in the future. And, coming around that is just that idea of, how can we use the Sabbath to minister to people, to say, hey, rest is possible, disconnecting from these things is possible. Because that was part of the reason I brought up the phone thing, is we both were like, man, did we really rest if we were, like this all day, playing this game or that game or messaging this person or that, or, scrolling through social media? Did we really give ourselves an opportunity to rest when we had our screens in our face all day?
Well, because again, and I think that regardless of and there's two things. One, you really hit on the fact that I think more and more we're going to see the middle start to dissipate into these two polar extremes. That again, the church needs to be prepared for. Like, okay, you're going to have some people who are just on this relentless grind, like you said. Well, I have 1 million, but I need 5, and then I have 5, and 5's not enough. I need 7, and then I need. Mm-hmm. You're going to have that, and then you're going to have the other folks who are like, I would kill to rest, but right now, Ashley mentioned it to me the other day. She's like, the entry point for middle class now is $150,000 a year. Like, that's insane. Mm-hmm. That's the entry point for the middle class. So you're going to have a large group of people who go, I can't rest because I'm picking up Instacart and DoorDash on Sundays and Saturdays to just be able to clear my utilities and grocery bills type of a thing. So like, I don't know. So you've got these two extremes there, but then the part that's universal across all of it is, like you said, this almost addiction to technology where it's like, well, but when are you really actually resting from the media, the news, the pace that's, of, again, even just social feeds of seeing what other people have, which in many ways fuels this consumerism of, well, they have this, so I've got to have this. And it's a crazy time we're living in.
Yeah. No, it really is. And, I had a stray thought that was in there. Maybe I'll get it later. But there's another, like Sabbath as a community thing is another thing that we had talked about. Mm-hmm. It's both a community thing and it's still very individual too. Like, how do I rest versus another person? So there's, when I say that, that's, definitely. I mean, individual based on circumstance, based on preference, wiring and things like that. But one of the things I was challenged with on this topic last year was just this idea that if you have, a group of people in your community and you're Sabbathing, say on Sunday, and you have people in your community who can't Sabbath on Sunday, like, okay, maybe you can't fix that problem per se, but what you can do is see to what extent you can help people get to that point. And some of that could be saying, looking at, the demographic of your church and the surrounding area and say, okay, maybe Saturday is a better day to Sabbath. Maybe, we say, hey, we have, support through our congregation for, 2 or 3 different Sabbath days. Here's a community of people who can Sabbath on this day. Here's a community of people who can Sabbath on this day. But, and maybe a third day, whatever, it doesn't matter. But just this idea of, how can we really give people an opportunity to rest and invite them into that, and into that, recognition of reliance on God. I was looking up because I wanted to be certain of where it was, so I don't have another gaffe like last time, where in Matthew 12, Jesus, refers to himself as the Lord of the Sabbath, and he, it's not the only place in scripture that's repeated in other gospels. But just this idea that, he's talking to people who are so rules focused about what Sabbath was that they missed the whole point of it. Right.
Yeah.
And I really like I desire mercy and not sacrifice. Because, that phrase ties me back to all the instances in the prophets where he says, I'd rather have your hearts than your sacrifices, essentially. Like a good thing would be that sacrifices were unnecessary. Perhaps if you didn't sin so much and you sacrifice less, I would actually be happier with you, because it isn't the sacrifices that make God happy. That's meant to be a repair of, not a pursuit
of what's broken.
Right. And so, when we see Sabbath either as a task to check off or just, it's day of the week, we go to church is our Sabbath, whatever, no big deal. But, I know you've described it. I know growing up, in retrospect, looking back, the whole, thing about, families don't fight as much as they do on Sunday right before church. Like, is that really Sabbathy if that's the way churches and Sunday mornings are constructed, is like, so everyone's at the height of their stress to get to this place so that they can be in community and rest for a couple hours and then go back home and do whatever. And how does that work for the people who are working to make the church function? Are they really Sabbathing on that day? And as the society around us continues to push more towards produce, consume, how much of, last week we talked about differentiating the church in terms of the kindness that we can show and patience and being able to ask questions, or just say, I'm not close enough to even investigate this, so I'm just going to, not worry about it until someone who has, and we can know more about it. We can also differentiate ourselves by, just inviting people into rest and acting that way, not consuming, not producing, on a whole, but not to a legalistic extent. Right. So,
well, I think that's the challenge that we run into with this whole concept of Sabbath is a lot of times people are looking to it. So first of all, we've got the institution that has kind of established cultural norms for what it is, which aren't necessarily, this is what the Bible says, but more, okay, this is what we've done through tradition and institution and things like that. And so you've got that, but you have that in stark contrast with, I think, in many ways, what people are wrestling with. And so it is one of these things where I I am very concerned with the pace and connectedness of us as people. Just that there needs to be a call to really kind of examine this in all of our lives and be like, okay, where does this fit and what does this look like in our lives? Because we can, honestly, it is so easy, especially now, to never take a break, even if you're like, well, I don't work on Sunday. But I have all this activity going on, and because I have all these digital devices and all this other stuff, I'm not working. But I really kind of am, because the emails are still coming. And now I've got my AI bot doing this. So now I take meetings. I mean, the potential is like, now I take meetings on Sundays, but I don't take meetings. My thing does. And then it sends me. It's going to become an addiction that I'm very concerned about.
Yeah. Well, and it's the, the person who was speaking, and I always forget her name when I need it, who had written a book towards the end of last year. I think her name is Ruth. Last name is escaping me. One of the things she does, because so much of her ministry work involves reading, like there are things that she does not read on Sabbath. like she has a very strict selection, like so that she can enjoy reading, but it's not reading that is accidentally going to be work or intentionally. And during that time, someone else was wrestling with, on the one hand, we don't like cooking. That's not relaxing for us. So we go out to eat. Well, but now we're out to eat. We're not working, but all the people here are now working because we're here. And you could say, well, they'd be working regardless of whether we are here or not. So what's the big deal? But when you're talking about like, oh, I get to send an AI agent to this meeting. I'm not working, but my agent is there. Well, unless the whole room is full of AI agents, somebody is working, and you're still drawing more people into this. You're reinforcing the notion that Sabbath is not for everyone, it's for me. And
well, but I even think I agree, but I also think it's this misperception. And I think this is one of the, again, the enemy is so good at presenting things as like, it's kind of close, but just enough off that it's not. And I see this a lot with technology, where it's presented as, look, it makes it easy. And so all of a sudden you go, oh, well, it's easy now, so it's not work. And it's like, but it is. It's hiding work, or it's kicking it down the road a little bit. But again, even the example of your AI agents take meetings on Sunday. You now have the work of reviewing whatever happened in that meeting, either on Sunday or on Monday. You've now added more to it. And I think that's one of the biggest deceits of technology is, oh, see, it's going to make life easier for all of us. And I'm like, in what sense? It's just making it different. It's not making it easier. It's just shifting the work from this to this and shifting it from these people to these people. And it's moving it around. It's like that, whatever. You've seen the guy, there's like a ball under the cups and they just shuffle it really fast. It's like, aha, see, it's gone. And it's like, well, it's not really gone. You just moved it like over here is all you did. And you made it look really fancy when you did it. And I think that's the part that, especially I think people who are on both ends of the spectrum you talked about before are both vulnerable to that temptation, because you've got the Zoom CEO or whatever CEO who has $1 million trying to make 5. And the temptation of tech is, I can do all this, I can get to 5, and it's not going to be as much work. And it's like, yes, it is. It is just as much work. It's just different work. And then the temptation for somebody who's just trying to make ends meet might be going, oh, this tech's going to solve it for me. And it's like, but it won't. It won't. It will leave you just as thirsty. And I think that's where I get really concerned when I see some of this technology where we're already bad at Sabbath. We're already bad at rest. And all technology does is exacerbate or accelerate things. And so it's like, we're bad at this now. What do you think is going to happen when we've got this stuff that has all these promises that it can't deliver?
Right. Well, and just that idea that, when you're talking about like, oh, if only I had access to this thing, I could do this other thing, and then I could get myself out of the situation is, kind of
It's a very dangerous line of thinking.
well, and it's also like, how many stories are we going to then see? Hopefully not a lot. Hopefully my brain is just, got my little doomsayer in it, but people say scraping together like, okay, life savings, $5,000. That's going to get me this suite of tools. And with this suite of tools, I'm going to transform my life. And then you get the tools and you don't really know how to use them. You're fumbling around with them. You have no money to fall back on. And you're in a worse situation than you started with because you bought the lie that it was going to be easy once I have the thing.
And
Especially,
I'm already seeing that happen a lot.
yeah,
Not necessarily, this is all the money I have, so now I'm doing this. But I'm already seeing it where people are becoming slaves to this technology, again, on this promise that once you get this, then you'll be able to automate and all this stuff will become easy.
yeah.
But what they don't realize is then they get there and now the pace and the demand is even higher than it was before. So now you need these tools to even do what you weren't doing before. And suddenly you're like, well, now I can't keep up with that. So now I got to get another thing to be able to get on top of that. And you're like, oh, I just get an AI agent for that. And then it's like, well, then you're going to get the AI agent for that, which is going to now create a new pace that you couldn't keep up with before. And now you're enslaved to this new advancement that you're like, well, I can't get rid of that now. Because if I get rid of that, then I can't do the thing I did before. And you're like, oh my word.
Yeah. Or there's that one thing it won't do that you desperately need it to do to really cap out your efficiency. And now you're frustrated and mad and you're searching for other tools to replace this one with.
Yep.
That does that thing instead. Yeah. No, that's a really good point. Like, the cost not always being monetary, but I think the other thing is like, your entry level AI tools that are accessible, are already so powerful and easy to use for the most part, in that wish fulfillment vein. That also helps. I think that helps bolster the idea that, oh, well, this AI tool, super easy to use, saved me a ton of time because I got this one thing super quick that I otherwise would have had to pay for or do this other thing. And so surely I can master any other AI tool that comes out because it's going to be just as easy to use at scale,
Yeah, no, but I mean, like, I'll give a practical example in my own life where I actually had to get this back in check. Was at the end of last year, as the AI tools were really getting a lot better. I was like, I do this podcast already. One of the things that a lot of people say is like, I love the content. It'd be awesome if there was a, TLDR like summary of it. And I was like, okay. And it wasn't something I was doing before, but I was like, well, but if I use AI, I can accomplish that because it'll happen faster type of a thing. And it helps, but I still, it doesn't make it go away. Like I say, it just transfers the work. So it's like, okay, it gets 70%, but then I got to do 30%.
Right.
But it's 30% of something that I wasn't doing before
Right.
that now is on my plate that I'm like, okay, well, I got this thing to add, but now I added like 30% that I wasn't doing. And now where does that? And so I actually, at the end of last year, really had to go through all my things and go, I have to turn some of this stuff off.
Yeah.
Like, even though the tech has made it so much easier, it's still, it's like people at Black Friday when it's like, well, I bought it because it was a good deal. And it's like, but it was money you weren't planning on spending.
Right. Yeah.
So you still spend more money than you would have spent had you not gone shopping at all.
Right.
And I think that's the same thing that I saw in my own life coming into the end of 2023, where I was like, okay, I've done all these things where I'm like, yeah, but look how easy it was to do now. I've been able to stand this up in a more meaning. And I'm like, well, yeah, but now I'm at like 200% capacity and I'm burning myself up.
Yeah.
And I had to go through and go, no, the biblical wisdom is rest and pause and solitude. And like, God wired us for that. Like that's important. And I actually had to go through and go, yeah, as easy as some of these things are, I just need to say no to them because it's actually taking away from my ability to stay focused on Christ, to just be at rest and be whole.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's true. And yeah, it's funny you brought up the Black Friday thing because I was going to bring that up. We had my 6th grade math teacher. It's one of those things I don't know how many people really understood what he was saying at the time, but he said every time he had Kmart, I don't know, he had a thing about Kmart. If he goes to the register and he buys something like, hey, you saved $10. He's like, no, I didn't. I spent 30. And we're like, right, but you could have spent 40, so you saved $10. But I know there's just so many things now. I think about that so much for the exact reasons you said. Like, right, but would I have bought it if it wasn't on sale? No. I don't need this thing, And it's one thing where if you're looking at something, you're reasonably certain it's going on sale, so you watch the price and you buy it as cheaply as possible.
Sure.
So you don't spend as much. But we've been sold this idea, oh, you're saving. You have, by saving this much money, you're able to do whatever. And underneath it, and really not that thinly veneered, is just consuming stuff that you didn't need to consume, like I only ate 1 cookie instead of 2. Right. Did you need to eat any cookies at all today, Joe? After you checked your blood sugar, did you really think that only 1 cookie was the right choice, when the alternative was 2? No, the alternative was 0.
The alternative.
You still took in the carbs, sir.
Well, and I think that is where I see technology just turning the volume up on this to like 11, because we already see this. You think about our hyper connectedness of even social media, where it's like we know more than we've ever known before. We're more connected to things than we've ever known. In air quotes, in the sense like we don't really, but we think we do.
Right.
But again, it's like, oh, but this technology just makes it so much easier for me to stay connected to these things, to be aware. And you're like, yeah, but at what point are you actually taking on things that we really were never wired to take on in the first place? And so, yes, it feels like that blue light special where you're like, yeah, but I saved $20. And it's like, no, you spent 40. You spent $40 that you didn't need to spend, type of a thing. And I think that's something we need to be really, really mindful of right now, because I think the other thing that came to mind for me as I was thinking about this before we were talking about it is, I think also because of how our Western culture has been structured, we think of Sabbath as like that one day of the week that we do. But when you really look at the biblical text, especially in the Old Testament, like the festivals and the things that occurred that were all about rest and the year of Jubilee and all, it wasn't like, one day a week and that's it. It was like, no, if you actually look over the course of the year, they rested a lot. I think a lot of like our European colleagues might have a little bit of a better like idea of this idea where it's like, well, we work, but we work to live. We don't live to work, type of a thing. And I think especially in the West here, in kind of the capitalistic, consumeristic world, waters we're swimming in, where it's just like more is always better. The pursuit of more is always good. And, just continually running on that treadmill.
Yeah.
It's not good.
Yeah. And I this is probably going to sound like, potentially, depending on where people are at who are listening, who happen to listen to this, may sound a little judgmental without context, but just remember, I don't know any of your circumstances. It's more about me. And so the people I know, it's like, it goes, like, how much am I trusting on the Lord to carry me and my family forward? Like, do I need this thing to do this other thing? Yes or no? And how much of it is me trying to exert my own will over my situation, by saying, okay, now I have this thing, I'm set.
Right.
And and I think it's worth examining, because you may say, no, this actually is needful, this is helpful, it is whatever. But I know that I've just made, like, no real practical, but I've made some mental checklists where it's like, man, if I lost my job, what are the first like 20 expenses that can just go? And it's like, most of our Sam's Club order, like, you know,
Right.
probably, some of our couple of our subscriptions,
Right. Yeah. Probably don't need Netflix anymore.
yeah, it's just like, there's a lot of things. So I'm like, man. But then I go, well, okay, if I know I could cut these in hardship, why am I not cutting them now? It's like, well, because I like them. And that's sort of the, how we've talked about, we're kind of like, we're really primed as a society to just dive straight off of all the cliffs that come with AI. Like, we already have an endless supply of options for what we could view, what we can consume, what we can, the junk we can put in our heads and in front of our faces. And now we have AI that can say, hey, all that stuff you've been looking at, like, what is it you really want to look at? Because I got it, and there you have it.
And if I don't got it, I'll make it.
Yeah,
like, on demand.
It's easy. I can do that now. And maybe it won't be perfect, but it will be good enough. And
Right.
and if you don't think technology is good at figuring out what you like, Pandora,
The master of it.
Pandora, Netflix, you name it, they've got it figured out. They see what you're seeing and they go, oh, you'll probably like this.
Okay.
Amazon got a little weird in terms of what they think I like, but I
Ashley says the same thing. She's
but
like, these ads. I'm like, you really thought I would want to buy that?
yeah, this is the thing you think because I was looking for. Okay, I'll just tell this story really quick because I think it's funny. On Amazon, looking for a pair of like adult pajama pants with s'mores on them for my brother-in-law, because he had commented on a thing of pajamas that our baby has. And so I've been looking at pajamas for a while, right? Okay. So it makes sense that I go on Amazon in the app and it would give me like pajamas sort of thing. But never once did I ask for, click on anything that said I wanted adult men's satin pajamas with shorts instead of long pants. No, to boot. Like, there's a lead.
That's super funny.
Yeah. So still, I'll call that a hallucination, maybe. Like,
well, I think it's one of those things. AI doesn't it doesn't understand the randomness of people.
Yeah.
It's very pattern driven.
I think you thought a little bit too hard about what I was looking for.
You took that outlier and you factored it into your normal regulation.
Bring it in. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, as an aside, I suppose. But I think that's, and then recognizing then, like, hey, it's going to serve us all this stuff. But, sometimes those outliers are just going to be brought front and center. You're not going to get what you want. Or, and it'll test, should I really be relying on this? We'll try it again and it'll be fine. We're primed for it. We're not, you see it if you're on social media. And even reading some articles where, someone said this thing and now every article is saying the same thing and it's giving it all this gravity, and it may or may not be true, but we're willing to accept it because, now we've seen it in print 20 times. So if we're told AI is going to service this thing and we can see it do it and then we try it and it seems to work, Yeah, you talking about getting to 200% capacity just by doing things that were easy, because it's easier than it was, sure, but it still adds on.
But I wasn't doing any of it before.
Right. You know, and but it just, oh, this is super easy. I could do that. Oh, this is super
And the
easy.
thing is, in some ways, I think there's some real
Yeah.
good to that. The thing is, I think there's some real good to it, because now as I look at some of the things I do, and I think this goes back to what you said just very briefly, but I think anybody watching, listening really can take this to heart from us. My point of this conversation is not to be prescriptive to everybody of this is what Sabbath rest looks like for you. You
Right.
must, don't do these things, do these things, have it fit into this kind of like, well, no. But I think when I think about what that looks like is kind of the call to action is for everybody to actually take that step back and go, where do these opportunities lie?
Yeah.
Where am I being intentional about rest? And again, where might I be able to be investing more of my time in meaningful stuff?
Right.
Because I think about the great reset I did at the end of last year. There was some stuff that was going because it was easy, but it wasn't adding real value to anything. And I was like, I'm doing it, but I'm just doing it because whatever.
Yeah.
And it allowed me to shift. And now I'm working on more meaningful stuff. And so it's like, okay, that's good. But then also going, right, but where does rest fit into that?
Yeah.
And what does that look like? Because I could optimize myself into 200% meaningful work and still be out of the guardrails of what the Bible says, where it's like, no, you need to rest.
Yeah. Well, and also to be able to rest, you need to have space to be able to prepare to rest. Right. Unless you're also fasting, which is valid. You can do that on Sabbath, knock yourself out. Like, if you're not into food prep and that's not restful for you, like doing stuff during the week so that you can have what you need to sustain yourself, for the Sabbath, can be a thing that's going on. If there's certain tasks, like, okay, there's a chore that has to get done this week. Let's make sure it gets done before Sabbath so that we're not worrying about that task on the day of. Like, any time that we've missed out in our household on Sabbath, you just turn around and just see all the poor planning that went into things. And sometimes it's not always poor planning. Sometimes it's like, oh shoot, that went wrong, and that meant this didn't happen.
Life just does what life does.
And we don't have to, retain guilt over that. But it's that idea, like, when we don't prepare to rest, then we can't rest. And so if you're running at, even if you take a day off, if you're running at 200% the other 6 days of the week,
it's
you're
not
not
really
ready to rest.
No.
Like,
no, because you're even, and I think the number of people I talk to in corporate America who run into this same thing where, like, they'll say taking a vacation is more work than not taking a vacation.
Yeah.
And it's that same kind of mindset where it's like, yeah, but like, because I'm doing all this stuff, I can't even really enjoy the time off because all the work goes into preparing for the time off. Then it's all piling up. It's building up in my head. And so then when I get back, I've got 300% more to do for the next 3 weeks. And so honestly, I'd rather just not rest because it ends up being more work. And I know for me, that's always a struggle because I hate not running at like 130%. Like, I hate it. And so for me, I have to be really intentional. And actually, you bringing this up is just, it's even helpful as a reminder for me of how important it is to be like, no, you need that capacity to plan for rest.
Yeah.
Like, you actually need that. If you're, like you said, if you're running at 100%, you have no capacity to even plan for rest. And so rest now becomes work. It just becomes work.
Well, it's even like, even having date nights for us, this yesterday, we started doing a weekly check-in thing. And it says, do you have, what do you need to do to plan for a date night this week? I'm like, it is never going to happen if on Sunday we're planning for a date night this week. Like, we need to be at least 2 or 3 weeks out saying, when is it going to happen? How are we going to make it happen? Who's going to watch the kids? How are we like, we can't do date night on the fly. Even with only 2 children.
Yeah.
And like it requires that amount of forethought. Um, and so even that, it's just that idea, like, just, and it was that moment that really reinforced it for me as recently as yesterday. Is like, okay, what am I doing during the week so that when I get to Sunday, I can rest. And I think that's, you asked me how I was doing when we were backstage, and I said, good. Actually, wait, dial that back. That wasn't a thoughtful response. I've been really frustrated for a week about kind of how things are going. And
Yeah.
it's because it feels like I always end up choosing one thing and kicking another one down the road. And then by the time I get to that, I'm like, oh, well, now there's something else. Then I got to kick it again. Got to kick it. And it just felt like I just kept kicking the wrong things, to the point where I wasn't, like, even when I was resting, I felt like I was doing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
So.
No. And I think that's where, from hopefully what people can take from it, one is this greater awareness to the risk that I think technology, it's going to be a very tempting allure. I think to people from whatever spectrum you're on, this promise that this will be the thing. I mean, money makes this promise. Oh, once you make enough money, then you can rest. Yeah. And you talk to people with money, they're usually the most stressed out people you talk to, because well, now they have it, but they're afraid they're going to lose it. And they've got to, they've committed to all these other things to keep. And you're like, there's no answer to this. And I think technology is making a lot of these same promises.
Yeah.
Oh, just automate this, get that, integrate this into your life. And then, you won't have to think about cooking, because AI will just look at what's in your fridge and then it'll plan your meals and order your groceries for you. Yeah. Won't that be nice? Like,
yeah, until it's wrong.
Until it's wrong and it blows something up, or you then pack more things into your schedule because, oh, now I don't have to cook, and you just end up more stressed out. And so I think there's going to be a real temptation for people. And I hope it's an encouragement. I know even just for me, of just really stepping back and going, where can I be more thoughtful and intentional about rest? Because clearly the Bible says it is important. All the way back to the creation story. It's like it is built in at the end of each day and then at the end of the week, where it's like,
yeah,
that's like, so there's this intentional pause that has to happen. And we do not live in a culture that celebrates or appreciates that at all. Yeah. And I think, like you said, it's going to look different for everybody, but I think more than ever, we got to tighten up some of these seams. Because if we don't, it's going to get worse, and tech is just going to exacerbate the living snot out of it.
Right. Yeah. You can't tech your way into rest. I think is, maybe a banner headline we could put across it. And I really don't want to lose the sight of the idea that, Sabbath is meant to be enjoyed in community. Like, how can you be inviting other people into rest and helping them with it? Because if you're having trouble preparing for rest, maybe someone else, you can work with them and you can collectively be ready for rest, and you just
right,
and not worry about it together. And and you're ministering in that way. And if you know someone who can't rest on the days that most people are resting, and they're just like, well, I got this day, like, how can you help draw them into community? Is it a day that, if your rest day is flexible, could you rest with them? Even if it's just like for a few hours, really considering Sabbath rest as a community event and a ministry opportunity, and just leaning into the Lord and helping other people do that as well. And don't let, the bill of goods that are being sold make us think that there's a shortcut to it.
Yeah. And I think that may be a good topic for a separate conversation, because I think there is so much importance to that. And I think it's not only just community and rest, but one of my other biggest concerns with when I saw this was, we already live in a hyper individualistic culture
Yeah.
that is like, John Wayne, pull yourself by your own bootstraps. I can do it on my own, radical individualism.
Mhm.
And AI is priming everyone to just become more of that,
Yeah.
to go, what do I need people for?
Yeah.
AI can help me figure all this stuff out. And I don't even want to open that can of worms, because I think there's a whole discussion in there about what does it really mean to be in community, and what role do people and interpersonal interactions play in this rising digital age. Because to me, that's another one of the biggest risks. I mean, I talk about it a lot on my podcast about is dangerous waters we're swimming in already, and it's going to become even more as it becomes more advanced. So let's put a pin on that one and continue that one, because I think that's a really important one. But I agree with you. I think, what we can do in rest, it's not just about how do I rest,
Right.
which I think came up even in your point of like the Zoom CEO, like, oh yeah, now I can have all these meetings that I don't have to be at. It's like, right, but what expectation are you placing on everyone else?
Right.
And is your desire for individual rest at the expense of others, or is it an enabler of helping others into that same kind of rest cycle?
Right.
So, okay, cool, man. I always enjoy our conversations. So hopefully people find it as helpful as I do. I know I enjoy them. And hey, we got to shout out our New Zealand friends.
I know. I was going to say.
We made the charts. That's right. So.
If you're in New Zealand.
That's right.
Yes.
There you go. So with that, thanks all for watching, listening, and we will catch you on the other side.